Good Wednesday to you, everybody in COM 110. Welcome to a quick review of the answers for the last quiz. So first things first, right out of the gate, I want to apologize for the delay of this. I'd hope to have this video to you on Tuesday because, the test closed on Monday. But there were a couple of folks who hadn't taken the test yet, and we needed to get things sorted out there. And I'm not going to release the answers until everybody, is settled. Okay. So, because if I do, then that's unfair. Now the answers are floating around out there for you that took it without answers available. All right. You get what I mean. Okay. So here's what we're going to do in this video. I'll go through the quiz. I'm going to review the answers. Overwhelmingly, people did really, really well. Okay. You did good on this. I can see that you have a black belt in Google Fu in looking up the answers. So before I get to reviewing the quiz, let me say something about the final exam, which is going to open up here real shortly, okay, for you to take. Remember, this is absolutely imperative, okay? Unlike the quizzes, the final exam will not be open book, open note, right? This is something you're going to have to put into your head, all right? And also remember, and I cannot emphasize this point enough, if you miss this, when you're working in Canvas, like when you take this final exam, which will open up on October 11th and close on October 12th, when you're working in Canvas, when you're taking the final exam, Canvas is tracking what you are doing, all right? And I'm not going to say how, because that defeats the purpose. But I will say this. It generates a log, and it sends it to me as the instructor. And I will look at the logs for everyone's final exam. And if I see that you're using notes, you're going to get a 0 for that question, and you risk getting a 0 for the exam. And given that it's 200 points out of 1,000, it's probably going to tank your grade. So just don't do it, okay? Is everybody clear on that? If there's any ambiguity whatsoever, email me, and I will say it again. No notes, no interview, no internet, no, anything except for your sharp and very astute minds. All right. Very quickly, also concerning the final exam and final grades, here's how I'm going to calculate your final grade. There's 1,000 points possible in the class. All right. And as I explained to you at the beginning of the semester, the syllabus quiz is there to make sure that you're not a robot. And it's not something that I have any control over. That is, I don't mean having control over you being a robot. Of course, you're not a robot. I don't have any control over the syllabus quiz. It gets stuck in there for us. And, it's a good thing because when you're doing online stuff, you want to make sure everybody's who actually they say they are. Okay. So here's how I will grade, assign final grades. I'm going to total up your points minus the points from the syllabus quiz because they don't really count. And then I will weigh your total points as a percentage against a 1,000 point scale. So, and the Regent scale. So for instance, on the Regent scale, 93 to 1,000, or 930, 93%, 930 points to 1,000 is an A. 900 to 900, 279 is an A minus. 870 to 899 is a B plus, and so on and down the scale. And this grade scale is available to you online through the Regent portal, and it's in the student handbook, and it's everywhere. Okay, so I'm going to add up all of your points and then look at the grade scale 1 to 1,000. And where you land on the percentage scale, that's the grade that you're going to get. But I will not be counting the 100 points from the syllabus quiz. Also, I will not be counting this last quiz was worth 34 points, not 30 points, because I put the extra credit question in there. We'll get to that in just a second. I'm not going to count that as a percentage against you. If you got all 4 points from that extra credit question, in terms of how I'm grading and making final grades, the quiz was worth 30 points. The 4 are extra. So that will just add to your total, and it's not a percentage game. I won't say, oh, well, the quiz was worth 34 points and you got a 29. So therefore you got this many percentage out of 34. No, if you got a 29, you got 29 points total of the 1,000 available from the class. Okay, does that make sense? All right. So if it doesn't, again, please reach out to me. But the main point here is we will not be counting the points from the syllabus quiz in your total grade. Those don't count. All right. And what we will be doing is adding up all of your points and seeing where you fall on a 1,000 point scale. All right. And then you're done. Okay, let's take a look at the quiz. I'm going to go through, excuse me, it's allergy season. And I'm just like, what? I'm going to go through the questions and then the answers. Again, people did really, really well. Good job. And you'll notice I give partial credit for some of your scores when you look at your scores. Okay. Because if I think, okay, you're basically in the right neighborhood, I'll give you half the points. Okay. Question number 1, which of the following are the 3 fundamental elements of a 3-act story structure? And the correct answer is the setup, the confrontation, and the resolution. Now, let me just say in general, I need to sip a little water. My throat's just killing me. I'm sorry. Okay. The reason that we're studying this, all right, and I noticed this looking at your recorded speeches. If audiences are accustomed to hearing stories in a structure, and there are a number of different structures you can use, but this is not a story creation class. All right, this is what are the elements of public speaking, but the foundational element is how you organize the speech. Okay, and your audience, because they're soaked in this culturally in media, they're used to a certain structure. So if you construct your speech in accordance with a structure that they're used to seeing, that's going to help it fit and stick in their ear. So they're used to hearing a setup. Here's the protagonist and sometimes the antagonist, and this is what they're doing, and then the confrontation. This is how they clash, and then the resolution. All right. So you keep that in mind as you're sitting down and thinking, all right, I need to create a narrative, whether its presentation, its form is written or spoken. Okay, question number 2. In his video, Dr. Gardner noted that a pinch point in a story is, the correct answer is something that causes a character to do something. Here's one where there was a little confusion, amongst you. Remember, it's real easy to keep these separate in your head. A pinch point is something that causes the protagonist to do something. I mean, think about just reaching over and pinching somebody. I mean, as a mnemonic device, without even saying anything. There you are, you're riding the bus, or you're sitting in a restaurant or a coffee shop, and you reach over and you go, okay, they're going to react. So a pinch point is an event that causes the protagonist or the antagonist, some character, to react. Okay. A plot point is that reaction. So especially if it's a change and it changes the direction of what the protagonist or antagonist is doing. Okay. So pinch point is something that causes the character to do something. Question number 3, in Dr. Gardner's story, The Present, why does his brain repeatedly play fragments of music in his head? And the correct answer is to harp on words better left at the trailhead. Now, these kinds of questions, and they'll be more like this on the final, it doesn't matter one way or another in terms of what we're learning in this class. If you know why musical fragments play in my pointy little head, I include questions like this to see whether or not you've read the material and you're exercising those muscles of familiarity. You're learning how to learn and remember stuff that you read, which is a really important part of information retention. Okay, whatever the class is. All right, question number 4. Briefly explain the term inciting incident. An inciting incident can be, an inciting incident is the thing, is the event or whatever, an event, defined broadly, that causes the protagonist or antagonist, but we're sticking with the protagonist, that causes the antagonist to launch on their change of direction. Think of Wizard of Oz and Dorothy. The setup of the story is Dorothy's in Kansas, and it's boring because it's Kansas. I lived in Kansas for a number of years, so I'm sympathetic to the story. And she wants to get out of Kansas. And in fact, in the story, if you've never seen the film, watch the film, and don't watch it with the Pink Floyd music. Okay, I have no idea where that came from, but watch the film, and it's so obvious. The filmmakers, that they say, okay, she's in Kansas, but she doesn't like to be in Kansas, and they film all of the time in Kansas in black and white, and then the tornado comes. Now the tornado is a pinch point, but her encounter with the tornado is an inciting incident because it launches her on her journey, which is to get out of Kansas, and like picks her up and whisks her away. And then again, they're just like clubbing you over the head with it in this story design. There's absolutely no doubt left in your mind that the plot has changed because now she's in the land of Oz and everything's in color. Okay. That's the inciting incident. It's the event, and it doesn't necessarily have to always happen at the front. It usually does. You can have inciting incidents throughout the story. But by the way of a speech, I would recommend that you keep them to a minimum, like of 1 or 2, because then you'll lose your audience. They'll go, where's this going next, or what's going to happen next? Okay. Inciting incident. Question number 5. Which of the following is not one of the things typically done in the denouement part of the 3-act story? And that's just a French word for things sliding down. Okay. And typically not the introduction to introduce an inciting incident, because you're trying to wrap things up, and you're wrapping things up in your narrative too. So for this coming speech, when you're saying, this is what I was. So you're the setup is you're the protagonist. You're describing this to us. This is who I was at this state, and this is how I was thinking. And it could be, and by the way, this is completely open to you. If you want to talk about change in political view, because the last speech we talked about politics. You want to talk about change in like your physical habits. You didn't work out and you wanted to be stronger, and you did, and now you are. Okay, completely up to you. All right. So you set it up. This is who I am. This is what I wanted to be. Then this happened, like one day, let's stick with the physical fitness. I was walking past a Planet Fitness, and I looked through the glass, and I just said, hey, that could be me. And I went in, and it started, and it was me. And then I was working out, and I feel great. And now, I sleep better, and more plates, more dates if you're a guy. Okay, so that's the end. That's the denouement, and you're wrapping things up. You don't want to say, and then more plates and more dates. But then I found that actually that's not true, and I'm miserable. And that may be true by way of your life arc. But remember what we're doing here. You're not walking around when you're writing a speech or writing a narrative of any type. It doesn't matter how you deliver it. You are not walking around like a stenographer, writing down everything that happened. No. You are a conductor. You are an organizer. You're a cook. You're gathering ingredients together. And yeah, sure, there's lots of things in the cabinet, but hey, man, garlic powder really doesn't go in chocolate cake. I mean, maybe. I don't think so. So don't put it in there. Okay? So don't put things in that violate the structure because when you deliver the speech, it's going to make it hard for people to follow. Okay. Question number 6, briefly explain what you should be writing about in the setup stage of a 3-act story structure during during this setup stage, you should be describing the protagonist. Now, this is where good speaking or good writing really takes shape. We just in 8 weeks, man, it's just so hard because you got to get to so much. One of the best ways to really hook the audience, whether you're delivering it as a spoken presentation or a written presentation, is to be sensitive, be aware of place. And I don't just mean, and I was sitting in my room staring at my now crumb covered plate that used to be stacked, that was, stacked with chocolate cake. I don't eat breakfast in the morning. So, my mind tends to wander to food. And then, I saw all the crumbs. Okay. That's not necessarily what we mean by place, but place is you describing what's going on, what you're feeling, in such a way that the audience can actually imagine themselves there too. Politicians that get really effective as campaigners master this. Barack Obama was really good at it. Bill Clinton was really good at it. Okay, so in the setup phase, you're telling people about the protagonist, the motives, who they are, who you are, what it is in this story, not your whole life. In this story, what are your desires, your dreams, and one of the hooks that I didn't cover, but one of the hooks to really get your audience interested in the protagonist is this sense of place. Okay, question number 7. Why, according to Dr. Gardner, does the three-act story appeal? And as 3X story structure, maybe a little typo there, to the listener. It taps into our need as communicators to find a beginning, middle, and end to every story. That's true. Now, you could argue that there is not a beginning, middle, and end to every story. And there have been narrators, storytellers who have broken this mold. So-called beat literature often breaks the mold, although not all the time. It was developed as a spoken form, beat poetry. Some of the guys that are, in that genre that really bust the mold are like William Burroughs, or Sean Cassidy. William Burroughs in particular. I mean, you read his stuff, you're like, all right, my brain needs a break. And he would give speeches. Okay. You're not, trying to revive the beat movement. All right. You're trying to tap into the expectations of an audience so they'll pay attention to what you say. Question number 8, briefly explain what is meant by the term plot point. And the plot point, this, is best described. Remember to distinguish this from pinch point, in which the main character does something different, where their actions, whether it's their actions, their attitudes, their behavior is changed. Okay. And this change pushes them forward towards the place that they're going to go. Remember when you're writing this speech, excuse me, and here's sort of the trick, the sleight of hand in speech writing or storytelling. You already know how it's going to end. In fact, one of the ways to write a narrative, if you're having a hard time thinking about the setup, is start by describing the ending. This is where the character ended. In this case, for this next speech, that's you. This is where the character ended. And then work backwards by way of plot points to get to the beginning of where the character was at. All right. I've never found that terribly effective. My brain just doesn't work that way. But if it does for you, great. Question number 9. In the story, The Present, would the encounter with the bear best be described as a plot point or a pinch point? Briefly explain your answer. Okay, here again, it's really not important for your learning about public speaking, whether you remember or not that what the encounter of the bear was. Excuse me. See, look at me. This again was to make sure that you're reading and retaining the material. And the correct answer is it's a pinch point. Why? Because the bear, the encounter with the bear, again, think about sitting next to somebody and just reaching over and pinching them. It jolts the protagonist. Now, some of you who answered this, I could tell you really You hadn't read the question because you described how it frightened the protagonist. The protagonist didn't know what to do. That's not in the story. And I can tell you, as the one who lived the story, it didn't frighten me when I saw the bear. And which, reflecting back on it, I thought, yeah, that's weird. Black bear are relatively, and I use that term, carefully, harmless. So when I'm out in the woods and hiking, I don't worry about black bear. I don't worry a lot. That's why I go out there. But anyway, so now, I could tell if you'd read the story or not. And the point of the question was, had you read the story? Okay, so the answer is it's a pinch point because it's like a jolt to the protagonist. And this pushed the protagonist to do something different. And in this case, it pushed the protagonist to think about being present in the moment differently. All right. So although the protagonist is the movement, the backdrop for the story is the move. And I've told this story as a speech, as a narrative piece. Okay. And although the movement of the protagonist is on this trail, I only use that as a backdrop. In fact, I use it quite intentionally. Let me tell you why. And you can use this in your speeches. I wanted the audience to have a sense, to come away with a sense of movement in here, of how I changed positions, of how I moved from one place to another. And to me, it was just an obvious fit that if I set up a story in which the protagonist was physically moving and I was describing different parts of that physical movement, like what did it look like? What did it sound like? Was it hard going uphill? Was it hot? Was the protagonist thirsty? Were they sweaty? Were they tired? Things that I knew by way of experience that people could relate to, because we've all been out and walking. It's like, oh, I'm tired, I'm hot, and it's sweaty, and that would give a sense of movement and some discomfort. Okay. So the correct answer is pinch point. And I gave you partial credit for those. Like it was a plot. And I was like, well, no, not really. And then you explained. And then if you kind of explained what is a pinch point, I gave you credit for it. Question number 10, true or false? The midpoint of a 3-act story structure is about the middle of the story's total word count. That's completely false. I mean, if again, in constructing your speech, I wouldn't leave the midpoint. That is the point where things really change. Way, way, way to the end. All right. If it happens somewhere towards the center, all right, that's all right. But it's not defined as strictly in the middle. Question number 11. The pre-climax of a 3-act story structure is sometimes called the dark night of the soul. Yes, this is when the protagonist begins to wonder about all the values and things and assumptions and directions that she had assumed were correct, and begins to say, oh, wait a minute, maybe I got this all wrong. And that causes, depending on what the story is, say thinking about your speech, this can be a real existential crisis, like, my Lord, why am I here? Okay, dark night of the soul. Question number 12. In the story The Present, Dr. Gardner wrote that and I have to chuckle because I mean, I like answers that have 4 options. So after what are 3 obvious, I always try to throw one in just to round out the 4th. The answer is likes hearing owls. The options were likes hearing owls, hates hearing owls, has never heard an owl, feels like an owl. No, there were some of you who click. No, I don't feel like an owl. Okay. This again is just to make sure that you're exercising those information retention muscles. Question number 13, true or false? The 3-act story structure should only be used to write descriptive speeches. False. You can use this structure to write any type of speech, any type of narrative, spoken or written, that you like. All right. It's a good catch-all, use-all. Question number 14, true or false? In Dr. Gardner's story, The Present, God gives man a long life to show how pleased he is with his creation. And now that may be, okay, my story was not a theological treatise. All right, but in the story, the answer is false. In the story, the answer is he gives him these years begrudgingly because mankind continuously complains about what mankind does not have. It's like, oh, come on, you got to give me more. You got to give me more. You got to give me more. And it's true. This is actually a very, very old story about the creation of the world and the giving of years to the created things, animals and humans included. And then this dialogue between the creator and the created actually pops up in a number of cultures. Okay, again, this is an information retention question. Question number 15. Our English word history comes from which of the following? The answer is the Greek word for weaving. Some of you, in fact, a number of you answered the Latin word for a man's, his story. Okay, I put that in there as like, I need a fourth one, because I've actually heard people say that, and I don't know whether to feel sad or depressed, or actually end up feeling a mixture of both. And I've heard people say this very sincerely. We need to have her story. And I'm like, his story, historia. Most languages, the majority of languages, are what are called gendered languages. They have nouns, and even some languages have verbs that are classified as feminine, masculine, and then some languages even have nouns and other words like verbs and adjectives that go with nouns that are neuter. They're neither feminine nor masculine. But the word for historia, we get it from the Greek, then it comes down to us through the Latin into French, and then there's even an iteration of it in Old English. All of those cases, the word is feminine. It belongs to the feminine category of nouns, and so it's got nothing to do with him. All right, and if you ever hear somebody say that, just go. You're talking to the uninformed. Okay, but the important thing here that I want you to remember is it means to weave. So when you're putting a story together, whether you're going to deliver it in a spoken format or a written format, think of your task like this. You're an artisan, and here before you on the floor is a big pile of thread, all different colors or patches of cloth. I'm thinking of that Dolly Parton song, "Coat of Many Colors." You know that song. And your job is to put together, organize all those individual threads or all those patches of cloth into an arrangement that first and foremost makes sense. I mean, it looks like, say, a quilt. It's square, or it's put together as a coat. And then, this is even more important, is pleasing to the viewer, because they're not going to look at something that's like, what's that? And so in your narrative, they're not going to listen. They're not going to be able to follow along if it's not organized, that is put together right, and it's not pleasing. So this is your job. You're weaving the story. Okay. Finally, the bonus question. Again, this is did you retain information? But I can see that all of you looked this up online. But remember, final exam, that is a no-no. Okay. Actually in the story, there's only 3 quotes from songs that appear. Now, I got to be very honest with you. From that particular hike, I can't tell you that I only had 3 song fragments run through my head, 3 and only 3. All right, those the 3 that I did use in the story were 3 that I remember, and 3 that also served the narrative. So I included those in, but the 4th one, new car, caviar, 4-star daydream, think I'll buy me a football team, true confession. The only reason that made it into the quiz is I was listening to Pink Floyd while I was writing the quiz, and I was thinking, I really prefer answers with 4 choices. I need another lyric. Oh yeah, there's one. And so I threw it in there, and I can see that you looked it up, but that's fine to give you the 4 points that again add to the total points towards 1,000. Okay, everybody, that's it. It's a half an hour. Boy, that's longer than I had planned. So, everybody knows what's going on. Yeah, that the exam is going to open up on the 11th, and that's like at the crack of dawn. It'll open up at like 12:01 a.m. So hey, if you want to be up at 1 o'clock in the morning, I don't know why. On On the morning of the 11th, you could take the exam and get it out of the way, but it will close like the jaws of a bear trap. Speaking of bears, at 11:59 p.m. On Eastern Daylight Time on the 12th. And the reason for that, as I've mentioned to you in other videos, I have to get the grades in to the registrar. Okay. So if you have any problems, if you have a conflict leading up to it, if, maybe you don't plan on it, and that day, the 11th, leading into the 12th, you have a problem, reach out to me immediately. In fact, I'm not just giving you permission, I am begging you. Text me. My phone number is on the syllabus, but introduce yourself. Say, this is so-and-so from COM 110. I just fell down a glacier crevasse, and I may be delayed in getting to the exam or whatever. Okay, I'm stuck under a tractor. Okay. If you still have your phone, you can text, good on you. Because the window for making any kind of arrangement is extremely tight or basically non-existent, because I have to get the grades in. All right, everybody. I think about you. I pray about you. Have a great rest of the week. Good luck in preparing for the final exam and structuring and recording your final speech. I will see you on Canvas. Bye-bye.